My name's John. I'm in my 20s and I just moved out of my parents' house. I'm in search of lower cost living and I decided to move to a small town in Rainville Bay, southwest Michigan. It's one of those American towns you see in movies, spaced out houses, all built similarly. Most of the residents are elderly, making it very quiet for most of the year. No noisy parties, speeding cars, or anything like that, which I particularly love. However, shortly after moving, I noticed something weird. My neighbor, Mr. Anderson, has a peculiar habit of lighting a candle every night, religiously, at about 11:50 p.m., and placing it in his window. He stands there for about 15 minutes, gazing at it, and then he goes to sleep. On nights of strong wind or rain, he tends to shield it with something similar to a lantern. My curiosity was piqued, and I really wanted to know what it was all about. Was it a superstition? A local tradition, ancient enough for only the oldest or elderliest to remember? I don't even know how to ask him about it. I briefly mentioned it to an elderly woman, Mrs. Percy, a very kind neighbor who often shows up at my door with sweets and cakes. When I asked, however, she simply changed the subject, and this has happened more than once. One day, gathering my courage to approach Mr. Anderson directly, I walked up to his door and knocked. He opened with a friendly enough smile, and I hesitantly started asking him about the candle. He listened to my question, and for a moment, his eyes seemed pretty distant, as if recalling something. Then, he simply told me it was a family tradition, nothing for me to worry about. Unsatisfied with the vague answer, I tried to insist for more details, but he politely closed the door, saying he preferred to keep family traditions a secret. I was frustrated, but my curiosity only grew. I decided to search for information at the small cultural center in town, hoping to find some record that explained the tradition or someone who could shed some light on it. However, my efforts were in vain. The files were scarce, and the few available details on Rainville Bay didn't mention anything about lighting candles. I tried talking to the officials who handled the center, but they acted similarly to Mrs. Percy. Gradually, all this denial of information became an obsession for me. I waited all night by the window, just waiting for the moment when he would light his candle. On a holiday eve, I even stayed up all night to see if the candle could go out or when he would remove it. He removed it at exactly 5:55 a.m. I was running out of ideas. For a while, I even kept an eye on the neighbors' houses, watching if they would do the same. For some reason, only Mr. Anderson had this habit. With few options left, I went for my emergency plan. On that day, at exactly 11:50, I placed a candle in my window and lit it. It had been an intense work day, and I really needed to sleep, but I just couldn't. I sat in an uncomfortable chair in my room, facing the candle to avoid falling asleep. It didn't work so well because, slowly, Orpheus called me with his sweet song, leading me to Hypnos's arms. I relaxed, unconscious, when I heard a noise that made me jump from my chair. It was knocks, something hitting against the wood of my door. I looked through the window and saw Mr. Anderson at my doorstep. He knocked once more. "I need to come in," he shouted. "Let me in." I rushed down the stairs, still confused with everything. I approached the door as the pleas intensified, but when I reached the door, about to grab the handle, something triggered my instinct. I felt there was something wrong, and I decided to check before opening. I approached the peephole, staring at the one who disturbed my sleep. He was there, the familiar neighbor, but different. His mouth was open at an unconventional angle. His voice didn't come from his lips. It seemed to emanate from the black hole that was his mouth. His eyes darted frantically from side to side, unfocused on anything. From his chin, a thick foam dripped, forming puddles on the floor. His arms were bleeding and twisted, seemed crushed by the wood. Judging by the way they contorted, the blows intensified, almost as if the door was about to come off its hinges. I ran to one of the cabinets and pushed it to block the passage. It went on like that till about 5:50 a.m. I wondered why no neighbors had woke up with all this racket. I saw him through the window returning to his home, entering at exactly 5:55 a.m., appearing at his window to remove the candle. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was sleep-deprived and had to drink about 5 cups of coffee to make it through the workday. The sleepless night left me like a human wreck. I had to go to work in that state, and the 5th cup of coffee in my hand felt like an illusionary comfort as I tried to stay awake. I couldn't help but think about the events of the previous night, the image of Mr. Anderson desperately banging on my door, haunting my thoughts with every blink. At the end of the workday, I decided I needed to understand what was going on. I took the way back home, nervous and tense. The town was shrouded in a peculiar silence, and the lights of the house hummed faintly. The street was deserted, with no signs of life besides me and the small details that made up the landscape, like the occasional passing car or barking dog. As I approached the home, I spotted Mr. Anderson in the distance. A wave of terror hit me, and I thought about turning back, avoiding the inevitable encounter. However, something inside me insisted that I needed to face the situation. He was walking slowly towards me, completely normal. His friendly and welcoming smile was back, in contrast to the hole that had been his mouth the night before. He waved when our eyes met. The scene was so distinct from the disturbing image of the previous night that I almost questioned my own sanity. "Afternoon, John," he greeted, as if nothing had happened. "Good afternoon, Mr. Anderson," I replied, trying to keep calm even though my heart was still racing. I hoped he would mention something about the previous night, but he continued the conversation as if nothing was different. We talked about the weather, the neighborhood, trivial things that made no sense in the face of the terrible experience we had shared. I was eager to get inside, past him, and went in, but before closing the door, I couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Anderson, are you okay?" He frowned, as if trying to remember, but shrugged. "Oh, the usual, young man. A backache here and there, but nothing major." I didn't know what to think. His answer was so casual, as if I were imagining things. He greeted me, and I saw that there weren't any scars, let alone wounds on his hands or arms. Could it have been my imagination? Unfortunately not. I'm well aware of that now, because night after night, he comes to scream at my window, saying he needs to come in, regardless of whether I have a candle lit or not. Believe me, I've tried both solutions with no result. Really starting to get used to it. It wouldn't be such a big problem till yesterday. I was setting up the desk to block the door as usual. I had already put the furniture on standby when Mr. Anderson started his noisy night. I was about to go to my room, put on my headphones, and get some sleep when I passed the staircase facing the back door, and then, while my neighbor screamed desperately that he needed to come in, I heard a single knock on the door in front of me. Since I lit a candle in my window, my neighbors ask every night for me to let them in, and now there's something knocking on my back door, too. I want them to die. Her voice was little more than a whisper in the still air. There were no more tears, but the tracks were there, catching the moonlight on her skin. The blood had dried black on her swollen lips. I should have stopped her. I thought about it then, and I think about it now. This was how it began. It was the night of my 10th birthday, July 9th, 1991. The last of the party guests were leaving, family and friends in ones and twos into the late summer night. I'd said goodbye and snuck into the back garden to play with my new football. We lived near the coast, so the taste of salt was on the air, a stiff breeze off the water cutting through the heat. Upstairs, my younger brother was playing on the computer. Downstairs, my parents were tidying up and starting dinner. A figure in the distance caught my eye, dark hair tied back, walking fast through the long grass and into the woods. It was a girl I recognized from school, Katie Bridges. We were good friends, but she hadn't come to my party, despite being invited. It wasn't really a surprise. Everyone knew how she struggled to get along with other kids. I had plenty of friends, but it often seemed like I was her only one. I watched her until she disappeared into the tree line. Where could she be going alone, I thought. There was nothing out there but hills and forests. "Mum," I shouted, "I'm going to Katie's, back in an hour." The lie was easy, and I thought harmless. I took off before anyone could reply to stop me. Spinning through the gate and across the grass, I caught up with her in minutes. Katie glanced over her shoulder when she heard me coming. She saw me, but kept on walking. "Go away, Kieran. Leave me be." "Can't let you go alone," I replied, voice filled with the confidence of youth. I couldn't imagine that anyone wouldn't want company. "So where are we going?" I asked, jogging at her side. It was just another afternoon adventure for me. "Nowhere," she said, turning to face away. "Anywhere. Away." That's when I saw she was hurt. A bruise was forming around one eye, a deep cut on her lip too, which she was trying to keep me from seeing. Blood on her sleeves and the back of her hand where she had wiped it away. I knew what had happened. Her mother had hit her again. Maybe her father too. It was equally likely to be either of them. I didn't say anything. I knew from experience that she didn't like to talk about what happened. Still, there was a swelling in my chest to say or do anything that might help. She was my friend, wasn't she? But what could I do? In truth, I had no idea. I passed a few moments in awkward deliberation, biting my lip as I kept pace alongside. The least I could do was stay with her until she calmed down, I told myself. Then walk her home. So, on we went in silence. She wouldn't speak to me, despite my best efforts to enrage her or raise a smile. We walked for a long time, and I started to worry about getting back. I remember thinking it was strange that we hadn't reached the beach. What direction were we going? I had never thought the forest went on that far. It felt as if we were going downhill too, which made no sense at all. Still, on she marched, eyes down and arms folded. Me tagging along and growing increasingly nervous. The trees grew denser, the space between them darker. I looked up to see the sky was now overcast, felt the air growing cold. Katie hadn't seemed to notice any of this. Or, if she did, she hadn't cared. Just as I was about to suggest turning back, the forest thinned, and I saw a clearing ahead. We stepped into it together, a small hollow in the rolling hills, ringing the pale trees with bare branches. There was a stone well in the center, maybe 3.5 feet tall and 5 wide. Behind it rose a wooden statue of an angel with wings outstretched, hands folded in prayer, hooded face looking down. We'd both stopped. It was so still and quiet. I could hear us breathing. Overhead the clouds rolled past, an ocean of gray stretching as far as I could see. "What is this place?" I asked. Have you been here before?" She didn't reply, but I could tell by her eyes that she hadn't. We moved closer, dry grass breaking under our footsteps. I saw the sides of the well were mossy and worn with age. There were other pieces of old stone strewn about, half-buried remains of some ancient ruin. The angel itself was damp with rot and badly split. Many of the carved feathers had fallen from the wings and lay in the grass. "It's a wishing well," said Katie, walking slowly to the edge. Her eyes were glassy, her voice little more than a whisper. I tried to peer inside without getting too close. "Got a penny?" I asked, forcing a smile as I spoke. The place was scaring me, but I didn't want to show it. There was no face under the angel's cowl, just dark wood. Yet I was certain It looked whichever way I moved. Katie had placed her hand on the stone, staring down into the dark. I saw her take a penny from her pocket and hold her hand out over the well. That's when she spoke those words, quiet but clear. I want them to die. My parents. I wish they were both dead." She dropped the coin, and we watched it fall. A spark of light caught on the metal as it turned. A piece of the sky snatched into the dark, pulled down to vanish in the silence below. There was a flash of wind, a feeling like we had plunged into icy water. I gasped for breath, shaking with the fear that had grown in me since we had arrived. We shared a look and turned to run together, side by side, back the way we had come. The sun came back out as we returned, but it still felt like we had been gone for hours. I recall expecting a rollicking when I got home, but no one said a word. When I burst into the back gate, my brother was still playing on the computer, my parents still tidying and sorting dinner. I checked the clock and found that I'd been gone less than 30 minutes. Had I misread the clock? "That was quick," my mom said as I came in. "Pity Katie couldn't come today. Is she all right?" She gave me a look that said she knew about Katie's problems. Everyone in town did, but nothing ever changed. "Yeah, she's okay," I replied. I didn't tell anyone where I'd been with Katie, what we saw, what was said. Not then, not ever. Katie was woken up that night around 2 a.m. The house was quiet, but she could feel that something was wrong. She sat up in bed and stared at the door. There was a pull in her thoughts, a call, telling her to come and look. She crept out into the hallway and peered downstairs. All the doors were closed. She took the first step down, listening. She would be in trouble if her parents caught her out of bed, but she couldn't resist any more than she could resist breathing. There was something down there she knew, something she had to see. There was a little light in the living room, but nothing made a sound. She held her breath and opened the door. Katie's father sat very still and gray, eyes open and staring. Her mother lay motionless beside him, face down on the carpet. They had both been dead for hours. That's how she told me it happened. There were other stories, but I never wasted time with them, and neither did the police. The local paper said the two had heart attacks. Katie was taken by her grandmother, a chain smoker in her 60s who had only met her once since she was born. I never learned the details, but Katie's parents had fallen out of touch with the rest of her family. Still, she was a kind lady and did everything she could for the girl now in her care. Her own house had been a tiny one-bedroom, so she put it up for sale and moved in with Katie until she could find somewhere suitable. The town pried and watched and gossiped, from the old ladies down to my school friends. It wasn't right, but anyone who's lived in a small town knows how poisonous they can be. I didn't see Katie again until a few weeks later. Her grandmother hadn't let her out of her sight since she arrived. She came over for lunch, then the two of us sat in the garden. My mom brought us some drinks and tried not to fuss over my friend. Katie waited for my mother to be out of earshot before speaking. "We need to go back," she said. I told another white lie to my mom, said we were going to Katie's, as her gran didn't want her away too long. Once we were out of sight of my house, we turned towards the trees, taking the same path we had the night of my birthday. We walked for almost an hour, but couldn't find anything. We kept ending up on the beach, no matter which route we took. Katie wanted to keep looking. She was desperate, and I understood why. But I didn't really want to go back either. That place had terrified me, but I couldn't say no to her. So we searched, back and forth over the same ground, until we were filthy and exhausted. We searched until we knew we would be in trouble, and even then, she didn't want to go back. She finally gave up when the sun was going down. We took a seat on one of the hillsides that overlooks our homes. She'd been crying, and I hadn't noticed. "Can't tell anyone," she said, "about what happened, about the wish I made." She was looking down at the ground to hide her face, a tremor in her voice. "Please, Kieran, promise me, not ever." I didn't hesitate. "I promise," I said. I can touch on this memory only lightly. It's a delicate thing, fragile and perfect, a ghost in glass. I see us sat side by side, gentle clouds above the warm grass below. The only sounds were the distant waves, a rolling whisper in dusk's tender hush, two children alone at the edge of town, dirty hands and secrets, eyes alive in the sunset light. In the weeks that followed, I tried to forget that place, the angel and the well. As enticing as the mystery was, I couldn't deny I was still frightened. Some things were better left in the dark. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be that easy. 2 months after his death, the grave of Katie's father was dug up and the body was taken. The same night, her house was burnt down with her grandmother inside. They found Katie in the street, alone, catatonic with shock. I remember that night. The sound of the fire trucks woke me up, blue lights flashing as they passed. I got up and went to the window. Where Katie's house had been was the flickering light of fire, above it and black on black as the smoke fell against the sky. My breath fogged the glass, and I wiped it away. Behind me, my father was entering the room, and I hadn't even noticed. He put his hands on my shoulder, but neither of us spoke, just watched. I could hear the sounds of the blaze by then, tearing and eating the building away like a giant animal come to life and flame. I saw the silhouettes of firemen, saw an ambulance arrive. The beast roared and the roof came down, swallowed into the blaze below. Then my father snatched me up, turning me away from the window, and holding me tight like he hadn't in years, arms wrapped around as if he could keep me safe from all the hurt that waited in the world. No one seemed to know the truth of what had happened or why. A veil of secrecy had quickly dropped over the events, which was understandable. The local police, who had never previously been shy of chat and gossip, were suddenly tight-lipped. Even the mention of the Bridges family name drew dark looks. As for Katie, she was taken into social care, as she had no remaining family. This meant she had to move into the city, as our small town had not so much as a post office. It was all people talked about, though it seemed to me they cared more about the drama than the girl herself. I actually heard people say she was cursed. They said it like it was a little joke under their breath, like it might actually be true, and they were afraid to face it. Even my mother, who always had a soft spot for Katie, began to speak about her as if she was something dangerous, as if misfortune was contagious, as if the scared little girl who had come crying to our door when her father broke her arm was better off gone, best forgotten. I remembered looking at the burnt remains of her house on the way to school, seeing where the roof had collapsed in over her bedroom, and wondering where my friends slept now. Even months later, as autumn faded into winter, people couldn't help but stop and stare when they passed, at the boarded windows and the black scars left by the flame, at the pools of rain and fallen leaves scattered amongst the rubble. The tragedy of it all seemed to have a pull on the whole town, something we couldn't leave behind, the cold ash heart of us. I stayed in touch with Katie, despite what people thought and said. My father took the letters I wrote and posted them for me. He never said it out loud, but I think he admired the loyalty to my friend. He and my mother argued over it more than once. I recall listening from my room, ears to the door, but I heard him say to her, "It's up to the boy. I won't have anyone tell him otherwise." I didn't see Katie face to face again until we were in our 20s. She came back to our town and found a job, rented a flat, said she felt like this was her home, It had always been her plan to come back, she told me. Through children's homes and foster families, she always knew she would return. We managed to remain friends, but it wasn't the easiest to find time for each other. I had college, a part-time job, family, and a close-knit group of friends. They all seemed wary of her, especially the ones who remembered her from childhood. As time passed, Katie built herself a life, working hard and taking her chances when she got them. Within a few years, she started studying law at the closest university. I was so happy for her. I remember meeting her every few months for drinks, my measly life updates paling in comparison to her own. When I was 23, I was driving to the airport with my girlfriend, Hazel. We'd been seeing each other on and off for a few years. Then in the last month, we had moved in together. A driver in the opposite lane lost consciousness at the wheel, swerving in front of us. It happened too fast for any real thought, just a split-second reaction. I remember Hazel's voice. We were talking about the flight times. Then seeing the other car cut across us, a flash of the other driver slumped in his seat. The impact, blurred lights and colors, the car spinning and turning over, and then another crash as we came to rest in the tree. When I opened my eyes, we were upright, surrounded by greenery. I could hear people shouting nearby. The side of my face was wet, and there was broken glass in my clothes and hair. As my head cleared and I saw the blood sprayed across the window, saw other small white pieces on my lap. There were teeth and parts of bones. None of the blood was mine. When we hit the last tree branch, it had come through the passenger side window, striking Hazel's jaw and killing her instantly. I'm trying, but these are only words, you understand. There are limits to what I can convey with them. Regret, guilt, pain, loss, all these things, and how I hate myself for feeling them when I survived and she didn't. I can't explain it. Hazel's funeral was the hardest day of my life. I'd never really experienced tragedy before. All my family and friends were healthy and well. Katie's parents were the closest I had been to death. People blamed me, and I knew it. It wasn't right, but they did. I'd been driving, and I'd walked away without a scratch. They would never say it out loud, but it was all over them. They stank of it. I saw it in their eyes, the way they held themselves, the silence between words. My parents and brother were there for me through it all, but there was only so much they could do. You can't shield someone from all the hurt in the world, no matter how tight you hold them. Afterwards, I told them I wanted to be alone, and they reluctantly obliged. I drank myself stupid, drank until it boiled over, screaming at the walls of the unfairness of it all. At sunset, I pulled on a coat and walked out into town. It was late autumn and raining heavily, but I didn't care. I knew where I had to go. Into the forest by the coast, a coin in my hand. I was looking for a way to fix things, the only way I could think how. I walked the path myself, as Katie had when we were 10, through the woods and between the hills, head down and wrapped in pain, battered by wind and rain, desperate, crying out inside for a way to make it right. I didn't notice when the rain stopped, when the air had grown still. It was the trees that caught my attention, those skeletal branches. I stopped. In the failing light, I could see only hills and valleys, forest in all directions. Yes, I thought, this is the way. I put my head back down and kept walking, marching on until the trees parted at last. There it was ahead of me, after all these years. Nothing had changed in all that time. The old stone well, the pale trees, the angel with the hidden face. I thought I could make out the footprints of 2 children in the dirt and leaves. Thought you might be here. I spun around in fright to see Katie, breathing hard, hand on knees. She was soaking wet, wiping strands of hair from across her face. Couldn't let you go alone, she said. The words seemed frozen for a moment, a pause as the pain of the last week rushed up on me. Then the dam broke, and I stumbled forward, melting into her arms. All the strength left my body, and I sunk to the ground in tears. If you've ever felt like this, you'll understand. When it all comes out, and you don't care anymore who sees or hears. "I know why you're here, Kieran," she said. "It won't work." "What? How do you know?" I was still drunk, I realized, slurring my words. "'Cause I tried. My father, I made a wish here to bring him back, months after he died. But it wasn't him, Kieran. It wasn't my father I brought back. The pull woke me in the middle of the night, just like before. The urge to go into the dark and see. When I went downstairs, it was there, in the house, sitting where he had sat, rotting flesh and hollow eyes. It didn't have any teeth. The stomach was bloated. The smell nearly made me vomit. It had already killed my grandmother. I saw her body on the floor. Her face was cracking, brittle with the memories of her childhood. Then it saw me. It looked at me, Kieran, with those empty eyes. It tried to speak, to say my name. When it got up, I panicked. I locked myself in my grandmother's room. It was trying to get in the door. I knew I had to fix it. I had to fix the thing I had done. So I used a lighter and lighter fluid from her room and started a fire. Then I climbed out the window, went back to the front door and locked it inside. I didn't know what to say to her. Sat on the cold, dusty soil. Her confession had cleared my head. "I don't know how it works, this place." She got to her feet. It isn't always here. You have to want something. Want it more than anything else in the world. It had to be at sunset. You can't look where you're going. You have to keep your head down. I don't know everything you can wish for. Only some of the things you can't. You can't turn back time or make something out of nothing. You can't change. She paused, looking through the trees. You can't change yourself. "How many times did you try?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe half a dozen before the night of the fire. I was a child, alone, with the weight of those things. It was hard to stay away. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, Kieran. I wanted to make it right." I thought of her back then, a 10-year-old girl, life slipping through her fingers. I had no idea what it must have really been like. "I know how you're hurting," she said. "I know it as well as anyone can. But this isn't the way. You don't want that for her. What happened to my dad? He wasn't a good man, but he didn't deserve that. What I did to him." I rubbed a fallen feather between my fingers, the soft wood breaking apart in my fingers. I knew she was right. This place is evil, Kieran. We both know it. It's a trap for desperate souls. When I came back to this town, I didn't know if I could find it again. But now that I have, I know it should be destroyed. We should destroy it and never come back, so no one else can be poisoned by it. So we did. We smashed the well to pieces, dropped the stones down into the dark, not one ever making a sound. When that was done, we covered the hole with hundreds of broken branches stripped from the trees. It must have taken us hours. Last, we pushed over the statue. It took both of us, rocking it back and forth until it finally tipped. It broke into pieces as it hit the ground, each rolling away into dust. We didn't look back, just left together in silence. When we reached sight of home, we parted without a word. I had nightmares for months afterwards, something I never suffered from before or since. I would wake up screaming, not knowing who or where I was. The things I saw in those dreams have never left me. A faceless girl floating on a bottomless ocean, body tattooed with dark words and symbols. There are hands just beneath the surface, thousands, millions of them reaching for her. Then, angels in a cold desert surrounding a pit of earth. They pull each other's bodies apart and drop the pieces into the silent void below. They're screaming, but no sound comes. Only the parts of them falling, always falling, tiny lights vanishing into nothing. I didn't see Katie in the months that followed. It wasn't her fault, but she brought back too many difficult memories. I moved away from the town for several years, but could never settle. One morning, I woke up simply knowing that I had to go home. I had to be with my family and friends. My brother's wedding wasn't long after I returned. I saw Katie at the reception that night, sat alone on the steps outside the venue, champagne in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Despite her success, she still wasn't great at making friends. She turned to see me as I walked towards her. We hadn't spoken in years, but she smiled, took my hand to help her up. Then we were face to face, alone in the moonlit night. The sound of music and dancing inside seemed to melt away until there was only us, together. We kissed, wrapped in night and each other, as if from nothing. My life changed in that moment, finding something I never knew I needed. We spent the night together, then another. We moved into my flat the next month, and we were both engaged in the weeks after that. No one approved, but it didn't matter. We had never let each other go, not really. Even when the world didn't want her, I always did. I believed I had a lesson to learn, to realize what you have and hold it close. Everyone has hopes and fears. Everyone has their wishes and their demons. Can you hear yours now? Do you listen to what they say? Some can give you hope and drive you on. Some fill your heart with the things you've lost or will never have. The trick is to learn which are which. I need to skip on years again. So many it makes me feel old to write it. The world has started to feel shallower as I age. Smaller, narrower. There's less color, I think. Katie has a wonderful career. We have a beautiful home together and a good life. I'm her husband, though I sometimes wonder what else. Somewhere along the way, I lost my ambition and drive. I've been feeling uneasy for a long time now. It's been growing beneath the surface of our lives. Last night, I couldn't shake it. Couldn't get my thoughts away from it. I sat staring at the door. A pull in my chest, something telling me to come and look. Katie had told me she was going to meet a friend for a few hours. She often did, and I'd never thought anything of it. It was sunset. On the horizon, great clouds rolled in from the ocean, dark giants embracing the land. I followed her footsteps in the mud, though I didn't need to. I knew where I was going, driven by fear like a fire in the night. I walked on, head down. The air grew still and quiet, the trees thin and pale. I saw it ahead of me, the hollow, the well, the statue, standing just as they had when I'd first laid eyes on them. A path was worn into the dry grass. Katie was still there. She sat on the edge of the well, looking down into the black. "Knew you would figure it out eventually," she said. Now that I had arrived, I didn't know what to say. I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop trying to make things better. But I made mistakes. Mistakes I couldn't fix. It was like a fire I couldn't put out. I stood there in the dust, hearing the truth I already knew. There were no twists or tricks or hidden evils. I got exactly what I wished for every time, and it ate me away. Now nothing's right, nothing's clean. Everything I have left is poisoned by it. I'm empty. Can't you see, Kieran? Everything I have is worthless. She looked me in the eyes, and I could see it at last. All the years of lies and fear. I could never fix my mistakes, no matter how hard I tried. I wished my father would come home. I wished for people to notice me, to care about me, but all I did was make them hate me. I wished... Her voice cracked, and she hung her head, closed her eyes. Tears rushed down her cheeks and fell into the darkness. So many wishes for things I wanted ended up hurting people. I wanted you. I always wanted you. So I wished that you would love me. But it isn't real, is it? Because you never had a choice. So it isn't really you. And now, it can never be real. And that's my fault, too. She didn't look at me. Didn't even open her eyes. She just pushed forward and was gone, vanishing into the silence of the night below. I should have stopped her. I thought of it then, and I think of it now. That was how it ended. Now I long for something lost. There are no answers in this pain, no truth to find. It's just another broken piece of many. I close my eyes, and here she is. Eyes and voice and lies and fears. How much of my life was my own? Which decisions were forced upon me by the wishes she made? Did I have no choice in the woman I loved? If I can't trust myself, then what remains of me? What is left to believe in? I know she didn't need to make that wish. She didn't need to ask for something that was already hers. All she had to do was tell me, because I've always loved her, and I always will. Whatever's after this life, I know she still needs me, so I know what I have to do. I can't let her go alone. The notification on my phone pinged when I was in the middle of cooking dinner. Typically, when I'm in the midst of simmering a sauce, I ignore any calls from my phone. Perfection takes time and attention to detail. If I don't want to ruin the sauce, I need to ignore my phone at all costs. That goes double if the notice is from work. My sauce was racing to the finish line, and it smelled amazing. This was the most critical time. If I kept it on too long, it would burn. Too short, and it's not as flavorful as it could be. It's all about striking the right balance. But when my phone pinged again, and again, and again, despite not wanting to let my attention drift, 4 notifications in quick succession seemed to warrant a glance. I put down the wooden ladle and picked up my phone. I was right, it was work-related. But it wasn't a stressed supervisor emailing me about something that could wait till tomorrow. Instead, it was a notification from our security system. As the office manager, that did demand my attention, as much as I hated to admit it. I unlocked my phone and saw that 4 different motion-activated security cameras had gone off. The back door, the back hallway, the central office bullpen, and the storage closet. It was as if someone had walked through the back door, made a beeline for the storage closet, but had never come back out. What the hell? I mumbled to myself. Then I heard a hiss behind me. I wheeled around and saw my sauce had boiled over. I dropped my phone and moved to the saucepan before it burned, but it was too late. The sauce was ruined. Hell, I sighed and shut off the stove. I picked up my phone and dialed my boss, Jeff. He needed to be aware that someone might be in the building. He lived down the street from the office and could meet the police there before I was able to get there. Plus, until I saw the person in the storage closet leave, I wasn't too keen on checking anything out myself. 2 rings later, and Jeff answered. "Hey, Nee, what's up?" "Sorry to call you at home," I said, but Jeff cut me off. "No big deal. Gets me out of doing the dishes. What's up?" "Did you get the notifications on your phone?" For what?" "The motion detector at the office." "I wasn't aware I could get those," he said, genuinely confused. "Remember, we set them up when they came to update the camera software?" "Oh yeah, I remember now. I turned off the notifications while setting up my phone because they went crazy one night a few months ago." "I'm sorry, what?" "Before you got hired on," he clarified, "one night they just kept going off. I went to the office, but there was nobody there. I think they were malfunctioning." "What about now?" I asked. "Still think that's the case?" "Let me look at the video," he said. "Can I call you back?" "Sure." I hung up and slapped my forehead. The videos. Why hadn't I looked at the videos before calling him? I glanced back at my ruined sauce and shook my head. I had been so preoccupied with the sauce boiling over, I forgot to check them out. I needed to fix that. I pulled up the first video and watched the short 4-second clip. Or I would have if there was anything on the screen. There was nothing but black. It rolled for 4 seconds and then just ended. The remaining 3 videos did the exact same thing. I was confused. I knew the cameras worked because the main console was in my office. I had access to all of them, but none of those videos showed anything. I chalked it up to a bug in the software and made a mental note to call the alarm company and check for an update. My phone rang again, and it was Jeff calling back. "Hey, were your videos blacked out as well?" "Yeah. What the hell caused that?" "Maybe it's time for another update? Think the footage is available on the Eye in the Sky?" Eye in the Sky was what Jeff called the security system console. I knew what was coming next. "Maybe," I said, trying to deflect. "I mean, probably. Should we go take a look?" There it was. Jeff wanted me to join him at the office. I put the phone away from my face and cursed under my breath. I sighed and returned to the call. "We could, or we could just call the police and have them check it out." "Why not both?" he offered, in a voice way too cheery for the situation. "How long will it take you to get here?" "About 15 minutes or so," I said, less than enthused. "Okay, I'll meet you there. I'll call the cops so they can meet us there too." "Sounds great," I lied. "Perfect. See you soon." He hung up, and I resisted the urge to just chuck the phone into the nearest wall. In normal times, I'd dread heading back to the office after a long day, but this was worse. A potential person hiding in the supply closet. No thanks. I'm not a fighter, but Jeff is even less of one. If there's someone there, we were basically useless. I sighed and made a mental note to update my resume. 15 minutes later, I was pulling into the empty parking lot of the office. Our building was only about 10 years old, and Jeff had bought it outright at an auction. The previous owner had paid to build the place, and then just skipped town. No one had heard from him, and eventually the construction loan came due. It went up for auction, and Jeff had snapped it up. The building was a run-of-the-mill office as far as they go. A single-story rectangle with a storefront window facing out on the busiest street in town. Jeff thought we'd get more street traffic at this location, but that never really panned out. The parking lot was a cramped afterthought that just sat behind the building. Most days you need the Bartholomew Diaz navigation skills to get your car in and out, but that wouldn't be an issue tonight. I saw Jeff's big-wheeled raised truck parked near the back entrance. The fact that Jeff drove such a thing just seemed ridiculous. It was made for off-roading, but Jeff was a notorious neat freak. It was too big for the lot, but Jeff liked to stand out. Jeff thought the beast gave him a presence his body didn't. I couldn't help but chuckle every time I saw Jeff, a 5'5" sliver of a man, hop down from that elevated driver's seat. Watching him climb up was even funnier. I parked my beat-up Nissan next to him, and he gave me a friendly little wave. He was on the phone. I assume he had finally called the cops, so I waited for him to finish before I stepped out. After a few seconds, he hung up his phone and rappelled down to the ground. "Thanks for coming. I know it's not ideal." "Part of the job," I said, not believing a word of what I was saying. "Cops said they're sending a cruiser over in a few." "Sure," I said again, not believing a word of it. "You get any more notifications?" he asked. "Nope, not since the camera leads into the supply closet went out." "What's so attractive about the supply closet?" "Dunno. Maybe he knew that's where we keep the snacks and the coffee," I offered. Jeff chuckled. He needed printer paper and staples too, I guess. You can never have enough printer paper. We stood there for a beat, not knowing what to say. I liked Jeff, but we weren't exactly close friends. We worked together, and we were friendly, but it kind of ended there. I shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the cops to show up and break up the monotony. I suddenly realized this was the first time in my life I was actually glad the cops would be coming, and I stifled a laugh. First time for everything, I suppose. "Should we go in?" Jeff asked. "Let's let the cops take the risk," I answered. "Not a fan of Back the Blue, I take it?" "Not really," I deadpanned. "Maybe we can peek in through the windows. Might be hard to see anything." I'm gonna try," Jeff said. He walked around the corner of the building and headed towards the front window. As he left, it dawned on me that I was all alone in the dark back alley of the parking lot of a building where a potential criminal was hiding inside. I sighed and called out, "Wait up, Jeff." I started to jog to join him when the lights in the back hallway lit up. I stopped and glanced at the back wall like I could see through the bricks. There was a little porthole window on the back door, but I couldn't see anything from where I was. "Jeff," I yelled, "the lights are back up." A few seconds later, he came jogging back around the corner. He stopped next to me and I pointed at the window. What the heck? What's weird is that the motion sensor didn't send us a video. Are these lights on a timer or... No, they aren't, I said. How did it turn on? Not really sure. As the words escaped my lips, the lights went back out again. I pulled out my phone in anticipation of a video coming my way, but nothing did. I shook my head. "What's going on in there?" I said, more to myself than Jeff. "I'm gonna go take a peek in the window," he said. "Be careful, okay?" "I'll be fine," he said, with the confidence of a man twice his size. "I'll give Jeff this. He didn't back down from anything. This could be a blessing or a curse." He walked over to the window and stopped, looking back at me as he smiled. "If something happens to me, run." "Oh, I will," I said, not joking. Jeff cupped his hands and stared into the little window. I watched, anticipating running away, but not really going anywhere. After a few seconds, Jeff turned back and shrugged his shoulders. "I don't see anything." "Weird," I said. As I did, the lights started flickering inside. Jeff turned and looked back in my direction, but I still didn't see anyone. He was shaking his head in disbelief. "This doesn't make any sense." He turned back towards me and said, "Go around the front and see if you can see anything inside." I wanted to tell him to get bent, but I swallowed hard and said, "Sure." I spun on my heels and walked around the building. The last thing I wanted to do was peer inside the office when the weird crap was happening, and it really wasn't fair for him to ask me. In my head, I made a plan to get my revenge and call out on Friday. There wasn't much traffic on the street at the moment. That was to be expected. The town is sleepy at the best of times. In the late evening, it was more like a ghost town. I walked to one of the windows, cupped my hands, and leaned against the glass. It took my eyes a second to adjust, but everything inside looked undisturbed when I did. Off to the right, I could see the back hallway lights flickering, but no one was there to flick the switch. It was still odd as hell that the lights were freaking out. It didn't make sense. I was about to head back to the parking lot when something caught my eye. Near the supply closet, I saw an office chair pushed out from a desk. It rolled a few feet before stopping in the hallway. Either someone was hiding under the desk or... Whoop! Nearly jumped out of my skin as the police siren went off behind me. I turned around and was greeted with lights in my face. I raised my hands and shielded my eyes. "What are you doing out here?" a gruff male voice called from the car. "I work here. Can you move the light out of my face, please?" "You're the one who made the call?" "My boss did. He's around back." "Why are you peering in the window?" "Ask him. It was his idea." The cop opened the door and stepped out. Internally, I sighed. I knew this was going to be a whole thing. Cop's got a cop, after all. "You got any ID?" he asked. "In my purse, which is in my car, which is back in the parking lot, where my boss is." "No need for the attitude, ma'am," he said. "We got a call that someone was possibly inside the building." "Right, and you thought that after committing my crime, I would just hang out in front of the building on a busy street and peer into the window." "I'm gonna need you to step away from the building," he said. I shook my head. Of course, I thought. Before anything could go any further, Jeff came jogging around the corner and hailed the cop. "Hey, sorry, I'm the owner. We thought we saw somebody inside. We were just taking a look." "Have you entered the domicile yet?" "No, we were waiting for you," Jeff said. "We weren't sure if there was anyone inside, so we weren't going to take any chances." "Understood. Did you see anyone enter?" "Our motion sensors went off, but the footage was blacked out." "Affirmative. Who has the keys to the location?" "Just me and Nee here." I nodded at the cop. He looked away and back to the building. "Anyone tried to break in before?" "No." "Any signs of forced entry?" "Not that I could see." "Nee?" "None." The cop turned and faced Jeff with a serious look on his face. He pulled out his gun and flashlight and nodded to the door. "Can you let me in so I can take a look?" "Yeah, sure," Jeff said, pulling out his keys and unlocking the front door. The cop and I locked eyes for a beat. I smirked. "By the way, domicile means a place of residence, in where you permanently live. This is an office building. Nobody lives here. Just a heads up for next time." The cop looked away and grabbed his gun and flashlight. Jeff held the door open, and the cop walked in. Initially, I stood back and watched as the cop walked through the office, flipping on lights and switches as he went. But then I noticed Jeff starting in after the cop, and I grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "Any area he walks through is clear. I want to follow him to see if anything's amiss. He wouldn't know what our office should look like." "Neither would you," I thought, but didn't say. Jeff was here a few days a week, hobnobbing with clients on the golf course, coloring the rest of his days. But I wasn't sure if he was ever truly present. He always seemed to be going 1,000,000 miles an hour. Would he even know if something was out of place? Maybe, but maybe we just let this guy do his job? Suddenly, all the lights went out in the office. The cop turned back towards us and yelled, "Why'd you shut the lights off?" "We didn't," I said. "Well, what the hell happened?" "Maybe we lost power," Jeff said. I nudged him and pointed at the nearby computers. They were all still powered on. Jeff stared at the computers, trying to puzzle out what had happened, when I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw that we had a new video from the camera. I didn't think too much of it. We were now moving inside the building, but I decided to check it out anyway. Assuming it would be a black screen, I didn't have any high hopes for seeing anything. I clicked on the icon, and when the video came up, I was instead greeted not by a black screen, and I watched a real video. But it was from a section of the office that no one was near. It was by Jeff's office, in fact. In the video, nothing happened for a few seconds, until Jeff's office door slowly swung open. The video shut off just after that, and I clicked it again and watched it again. Then again, I scanned the edges of the screen each time, looking for anyone who had snuck in, but I didn't see anyone. "Jeff," I whispered, "did you check your phone?" He shook his head no. I handed him my phone and watched his face as he saw the door swing open. His face turned white. "Did you see that? The door opening?" "No, the face." "The what?" I said, confused, but Jeff just ran over to the cop. "Officer, I think there might be someone near my office. Look." The cop looked back at the phone and then up at Jeff. Jeff couldn't help but smile. "I think they're by my office." "Where was the rest of their body?" the cop asked, his face getting whiter by the second. "What are you talking about?" Jeff answered. "There was just a face, but where's the rest of them?" "In my office, probably." The cop reached under his uniform and pulled out a small cross hanging from a necklace. He held it in his fingers and quietly whispered some prayers. The tough guy demeanor he had arrived with had washed out like the tide. He was just a quivering bundle of nerves at the moment. Not that I could blame him. I don't think anyone's in here," he finally said out loud. "I think it was equipment malfunctioning." "We should check, right?" Jeff asked. "Can you call for backup?" I suggested. I could, but I don't think it's warranted here. "Can you at least come with us to check out my..." There was a sound of someone running from Jeff's office towards the central bullpen. We all turned in that direction, but didn't see anyone running. We heard it, though. We all heard it. As quickly as it arrived, it went. We were all alone in the dark and quiet office, utterly perplexed. I don't know what that was," Jeff offered, breaking the silence. "I think maybe it was the building settling, or street traffic." "That was a ghost," the cop said. For the first time in my life, I was inclined to agree with law enforcement. We should go," I said. "I don't think there's a threat here that can't wait until morning." "I think she has the right idea," the cop said. "We should at least check the storage closet, right? I mean, someone set the sensor off when they went into the closet, but never set it off again, so either someone's in there or the camera's on the fritz." I saw the look in Jeff's eyes. He was going to check regardless of what we said, and I nodded. "We can go look. Worst thing, some deranged psychopath jumps out and stabs us all. Best case, it's a ghost. Where's the downside?" The cop looked like he was going to vomit, but he wasn't going to leave. He was holding his cross in his trembling fingers and muttering a prayer, but he stayed put. We walked down the hallway towards the supply closet, not knowing what to expect, but finding dread all the same. We stood outside the door, and the lights in the building started flickering again. I sighed. "Probably a good sign," I deadpanned. Jeff didn't vocalize a response. Instead, he just grabbed the doorknob and twisted the handle, and pushed it open. I glanced over the cop, who had closed his eyes as the door came open. If it wasn't for the severity of the moment, I might have laughed. "What the hell?" Jeff said. My attention snapped back to the closet, and my jaw went slack. Jeff turned to me and asked, "Is this a sick joke, Nee?" My heart started beating like it was in the middle of a nightly jog, though my legs were cemented to the ground. If I had had my druthers, I would have listened to my heart and broke out into a sprint. On the floor in front of us were 36 pins laid out to spell one word: Nee. "The hell?" I whispered. "Is this a joke?" Jeff repeated. "I didn't do it," I said, trying to find my bearings. "If I did, you would have seen me on the video." "Not if the video wasn't working," the cop added. "The videos that got sent to the phone weren't working, right?" "No, but why would I do this? I've got no motive for this." "Maybe you want something else? A raise? Though this might be a way to get it," the cop said, truly throwing darts at anything. It was clear that his fear had been replaced with embarrassment and growing rage. "That makes no sense. Jeff, you can't honestly believe this crap. I didn't even want to come down here tonight. I ruined my sauce for this nonsense." "But why your name?" Jeff asked. "Don't think I'm wondering the same thing." "Do you know it's a crime to file a false police report?" the cop said, regaining his bravado from earlier. "Bitch, no one's filed anything yet. Watch your mouth." "Guys," Jeff said, trying to calm things down, "I don't need some asshole sweating me while I'm already dealing with some next-level ghost crap, okay?" I yelled, pointing at the pins. Just then, all the power in the building went out, and we were swallowed in darkness. If I wasn't horrified, I would have unloaded the snarky comment I had in the chamber. Instead, I was paranoid that something evil was in the room with us. "Nee," a disembodied voice said near my ear, confirming my feelings. "I see you. I always see you." I snapped around, but there wasn't a soul there. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "No," the cop said. "Me either," Jeff said. "Someone said my name." "Come on," the suddenly brave cop said. "I don't buy any." The power came back on. You could hear all the computers restarting at the desks. The lights over us turned back on too, but they were dim. I found that odd, as none of the bulbs were on dimmers. "Nee," the voice said. "Did you hear that?" I said, my eyes wide with fear. "You feeling okay?" Jeff asked sympathetically. "I'm fine," I snapped. "How are you not hearing?" "Nee. Watch the floor, Nee," the voice hissed, drawing out my name. Before I could tell the others, I saw the pins that spelled out my name rolling to take the shape of an eye. Stunned, I pointed down, but before the cop or Jeff could look down, the pins flew away. "Did you kick those?" the cop asked. "Ah!" the voice screamed directly behind me. "What the hell?" I yelled out as I fell into the closet. The cop and Jeff also stepped deeper into the closet until we were all crammed inside. The door slammed shut on us, and the lights blinked out again. We heard footsteps running away from the closet, down the back hallway and out the back door towards the parking lot. We heard the door slam against the wall as whoever it was almost ripped it open, but then there was quiet again. For about 2 seconds, the cop grabbed the handle and ripped the closet door open. He went at a full sprint, calling over his shoulder for us to call a priest. He got back in his squad car, hit the gas, and just like that, he was gone and guaranteed to never come back. Jeff helped me up. His hand was clammy, and I thought I might lose grip of it. We stood there for a beat, unsure of what to say to each other. Finally, I broke the silence. "What in the hell was that?" I'm not 100% sure," Jeff said, but what? "When I bought the place, I did get it for a steal." "Yeah, you told me that before. Have I ever mentioned why I got it for a steal?" "The guy who built it left town, right?" "Well, that's not actually the story." "What do you mean?" "The guy did suddenly leave town, but it wasn't because he wanted to." "What happened?" He was murdered." "Here? In the building?" "Yeah, but also literally here. in the supply closet. I ran out of the closet like the floor was lava. I tried to punch Jeff, but I remembered my rent was due and held back. I still balled up my fist just in case a FU switch got flipped. Why didn't you tell me this? I haven't told anyone that. It happened in the past. How did he die? Someone killed him, Jeff said, looking away. They might have mentioned something about ritualistic something or another. He was killed by a cult? I don't know that. No one does. All I knew was that the building was finished, big enough for my growing company, and way underpriced. I didn't have a choice, Nee. It was a steal. Is this the first time? Well, yes and no. There's been weird stuff before. Papers moving, doors closing, stuff like that. But nothing like what we saw here tonight. You've had weird things happen and never bothered to tell anyone. Never bothered to tell me. I close up the building most nights. Alone. If you would have seen something strange, I assume you would have told me. I never heard from you, so I assumed everything was kosher. Is everything kosher now? I asked. I don't know. You heard that thing run out, right? I heard something run out of here. Are we safe? I think so. Do you want me to go check? Seems the least you can do, Jeff. He didn't argue. He walked out of the supply closet and went to check if the coast was clear. After a few minutes, he came back and said we were good. We walked out together into the parking lot. If you need to take tomorrow off, he started, I'm going to need to take the rest of the week off. Like I was saying, the rest of the week, that's okay. No penalties on my end. Jeff, you should probably tell the office. Probably, but let's sleep on it, okay? I'd rather wait for Monday when you're back to do it. They'll think I've gone loco if it's just me. I agreed, and we went to our vehicles. I watched Jeff slip and bash his shin on the running boards while climbing into his Mondo truck. I laughed and didn't care. It was karma as far as I was concerned. I started to get into my car and head home. I knew it was too late to make dinner, so I was thinking about grabbing something when I glanced in my rearview mirror and nearly had a heart attack. I swear I saw someone sitting in the back seat. It was only for a fleeting few seconds, but I saw a pale figure grinning at me like he'd pulled a fast one on me. I slammed on the brakes and my car came skidding to a stop. Thankfully, there wasn't another soul on the road, or I would have had a major accident. I checked the back seat and didn't find any trace of a person at all. I chalked it up to being scared from earlier and headed home. The rest of the ride was pretty uneventful. However, as soon as I crossed into my apartment, something seemed off. Things felt heavy, oppressive, unsteady. It was as if I was wading into a still-looking ocean, only to find underwater currents knocking me down. I dropped my keys and my wallet on the counter and quickly scanned my apartment. Nothing seemed out of place, but my brain didn't agree with my eyes' assessment. My brain was telling me to leave and not come back. I should have listened. I glanced over at the pan of ruined sauce, now stone cold. I sighed. My stomach reminded me that I hadn't eaten anything since lunch. I popped down on the couch and pulled out my phone. I had to scroll new restaurant options for 10 minutes before settling on one of the 3 places that I usually ordered from, so I might as well get comfortable while doing it. I was checking out a new pho spot I probably wouldn't have ordered from when the lights in the apartment started flickering. Typically, this wouldn't be anything I'd be worried about, but considering the last few hours, it rapidly climbed up my things I need to be concerned about list. I put my phone down and looked around the apartment. If you're here, I said, let me know. Nothing was going to happen, I told myself. You're being paranoid. For about 30 seconds, that was correct. Then my microwave chimed and the door swung open. I stood up from the couch, unsure of what the hell was going on, but knowing in my reptile brain that the thing I saw in the car hadn't been a figment of my imagination. Something had followed me home. I'm sorry that something bad happened to you, I said, spinning around, but I didn't have anything to do with your death. Just then the saucepan started to shake on the stove. I swallowed hard and gave myself a second to comprehend what was happening. After a beat, I said, what happened to you was tragic, but I don't know anything about it. I didn't have anything to do with your death. The saucepan flipped off the stove and slammed on the ground. I let out a fearful little yelp. I was shaking. Just then, the lights went out in my apartment. Nee, the voice said right in my ear. Watch the floor, Nee. Leave me alone, I screamed. I didn't have anything to do with your death. "Watch the floor, Nee," the voice said, and the lights came back on again. I glanced down at the floor, but didn't see anything different. The saucepan on my kitchen floor jumped up like a firecracker was under it, and landed with a bone-shaking crash. "I didn't hurt you," I said softly, catching a cry in my throat. "I know. I'm the one who hurt them," the voice hissed in my ear. Then it clicked. This wasn't the ghost of the man that had been murdered in the office. This was the person or thing that had done it. My blood ran cold. "Watch the floor," it said again, this time with a laugh. I walked around the counter and looked down at the kitchen floor. My heart stopped. On the floor, written in spilled sauce, was a message meant for me. "You're next." "Oh my God," I croaked. Suddenly the pan flew up from the ground and came screaming towards my head. I dove out of the way as it slammed into the wall behind me, punching a hole in the drywall. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. The laughter started again and it filled the room. I saw a knife in my knife block beginning to shake. I grabbed my car keys and wallet and bolted for the door. I heard the knife plunge into the wall as I slammed the door behind me. That was several hours ago. I'm not sure where to go or what to do. I need help, and I don't know who to turn to. The thing, whatever it is following me. I don't know why or how it chose me. I'm not even sure if it's here with me now. It could be hiding, waiting for a moment to attack. Pray this thing stays away from me. Pray that I stay safe. I knew a man once, named Dr. Ford Ashley. He was a brilliant biochemist, and my mentor for the better part of 3 years. When I met Dr. Ashley in June of 2005, he was a character to behold. He stood at 6 foot even, and was as thin as a pencil. He had very pale skin, and a very slight, consistent cough. He greeted me in his lab with a smile and a weak handshake, before coughing into a white handkerchief that seemed to always be in his hand. By this point, I had completed most of my schooling, and was looking for an expert to help hone my skills and start my own lab someday. Ford, as I had come to call him, was at first very introverted. He told me about the things he was getting paid to work on, and taught me various techniques to make things faster and easier. It wasn't until November of 2005 that I started to learn more about him and his personal goals. Whenever there was free time in the lab, he would be searching for cures to various degenerative respiratory diseases. He was a visionary when it came to this, always knowing the outcome before asking the question, it seemed. Around the anniversary of when I started with Ford, I began to learn his true motivations. Up until this point, it seemed that Ford had spent nearly all of his time in the lab. I would sometimes leave late in the night and return early the next morning, only to find him still toiling away. He never seemed to need to sleep. It was July of 2006 when that slight cough got significantly worse, to the point that he began leaving red and black splotches on the handkerchief. I asked him about it one day, and he would only say that it was a bad cold or some other common ailment. I walked into the lab one morning in late July and noticed that Ford wasn't there. This had never happened before. I'd always either met him there or, more commonly, found him there working. I called his name and got no answer. I didn't think much of it, so I started getting ready for the day, checking the equipment and whatnot, when I noticed that the door next to his office was slightly ajar. I went to the door and called out for Ford once more. As I opened the door, I saw the crumpled form of Dr. Ashley lying on the floor, blood and black ooze pooling around his head. I rushed to him and propped him up in a chair, and thankfully he woke up. I asked what had happened, and he asked for a glass of water. I saw that I could get no further questions at this time, so I got him some water and went out to get us breakfast across the street. To my surprise, the day carried on as normal from there. When we were getting ready to lock up the lab that night, Ford explained the details of his condition. Since he was a kid, Ford was near constantly sick. Never anything major. He never went to the doctor. It was always just a slight, dull, ill feeling, as he described it. The most notable symptom was an ever so slight cough, near imperceptible if you weren't looking. Steadily, the ailment worsened. Not extremely, just taking more physical forms. When he was about 20, the cough became more prominent, and his skin became a sickly shade of pale. He said it felt like his bones became frailer as well, though he never got it tested. Those worsening conditions fueled Ford's interest in the medical field. He went to school for years, studying anything and everything he could. He went to doctors, though none of them saw anything specifically wrong with him. Dr. Ashley became cynical of the outside world, starting a life of seclusion and deciding that he would be the only one who could save himself. That was, I suppose, until he met me. After learning this, we both took some time off. We came back to the lab in August of 2006, though I suspect that Ford had been there all along. Very soon after we got back into the swing of things, Ford clued me in on his plan. What I'm about to tell you will sound like some nonsensical science fiction, but Ford somehow had made a working prototype. His plan was to counteract his body's weakness, which he found out was some sort of rapid cell decay, by absorbing the essence of living things. Ford rolled back his sleeves to show me how it was done. Tubes now ran like lines of veins down his arm. He took off his shirt to reveal that the tubes ran out of his back as they plunged into a sort of grinder-like device. The device could be handheld, and it had a large enough opening to fit a coconut. At first, Ford would leave it on his desk somewhere, and whenever he was feeling particularly ill, he would plug it in and feed it a houseplant or two. I was terrified of the machine for some reason. It somehow felt cold and distant, not just because it was an inanimate machine, but in a way that only a severely depraved human could feel cold and distant. A bit of time passed on like that, and I got used to it. It was now April 2007, and Ford seemed healthier than ever. He got rid of the handkerchief, and even started going for walks at the local park whenever he had a chance to get away from the lab. He seemed happy for a change. Then, all of a sudden, his condition rapidly started to deteriorate. He ended up worse than he had started, skin beginning to dry up in patches and fall off completely. He was coughing near constantly, and half the time blood was coming up. He could barely stand. Here's where I did the first of a few terrible things to come. Ford collapsed once again and his breathing was ragged. I could tell he would die if I didn't do something soon. I plunged him into the machine and threw some plants into it, but it did nothing. My mind raced, and all of a sudden, my feet carried me over to the lab and down the hall. There was another lab that tested beauty products in the small building. I went to that lab and grabbed a rat. I don't know how I did exactly what I did next, but I threw the rat into the jaws of that awful machine. Ford perked up a moment later, thanking me profusely, then consoling me. He said it was a necessary evil, and at the time, I believed him. We got back to work for a few days when, for the first time ever, Dr. Ashley actually wasn't there. I searched around for him, but I didn't see him. Everything was locked up properly, and I noticed that the machine was gone. Ford didn't show up all day, but I got a decent amount of work done regardless. The next day, Ford apologized for his absence and said he had a family emergency he had to tend to. I didn't think anything of it. Midway through the day, Ford asked if I wanted to go on a walk in the local park. He said he'd found a pretty spot overlooking a large field. I told him I would, though we'd probably be gone for the rest of the day, as the park was a very large nature preserve. Ford was adamant and said we could take the rest of the day off. So off we went into the woods of the park and began to climb up a mountain. I hadn't had too much time to explore this place as a kid, so I was following every twist and turn as Ford took them. It started to get late when I noticed that Ford wasn't carrying the machine. I don't know how I hadn't noticed this, but I assumed it was at his house or something. Slowly, day becoming night, just as we got to the mouth of a cave, I had a very uneasy feeling at this point. But Ford somehow convinced me that if we were lost, we could spend the night in the cave. It was a fairly tight squeeze to get in, the entrance maybe 3 feet tall, and it was decently well hidden behind hanging moss. I wondered how Ford had been able to spot this. The mouth of the cave looked unstable, like any sudden force or any sort of weight behind it could collapse the whole thing. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and I saw horrors I couldn't believe. I saw bloodied and torn up bones, hunks of flesh and blood splattered everywhere, and handprints on the wall. I tried to let out a scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. "Why are you so scared?" a crazed voice echoed through the darkness. "Can't you see? This is progress. You helped me make everything I ever wanted.
This is all because of you.
I ran for the exit as I heard and saw the machine hum to life. I looked back to find Ford already upon me. I managed to dodge out of the way enough so that his attack only grazed my leg. But he still managed to saw a chunk of meat clean off the leg. I pushed and punched at him, maybe a few times. It's hard to remember, but I managed to make some distance. I sprinted for the cave entrance and jumped out into the cold night air. I slammed at the entrance to the cave as I heard the whirring of gears come closer at a rapid pace. Finally, the rocks began to fall, sealing off the cave with piles and piles of loose earth. The device that Ford had wielded shifted from a brilliant man's magnum opus, his font of life, to a hungering steel maw devoid of any emotion. I don't know for sure how many people he had killed. Ford had been overtaken by lunacy. He had become nothing more than an animal whose only goal was survival. I sometimes pity the man to this day, even after all he did, as he didn't fail in the end. The maw became too hungry, and when I unsealed the cave I had trapped him in for days, the machine had eaten most of his body. It was either wholly gone or shredded beyond recognition. No one knew who Dr. Ashley was or that he had even died. At least until now, I suppose. To this day, I'm not really sure what was living in my attic. This is my story. It happened 2 years ago. I was 25 years old and was living in a big old house from the 1920s. It was my grandma's house, but she's in a care home now, so I live there by myself. I've lived there for about 5 years now, but it still makes me scared to be home alone when it's storming. All the sounds are so scary. No matter what I do to calm myself, I just can't relax. I've thought about moving, but my grandma loves that I live there. It makes her happy, and I just don't want to disappoint her. It was November, and it was a Friday, and I didn't have any plans for the weekend. I was just going to watch some movies and maybe clean the attic. I hate the attic. It's cold and dark, and I always get this weird feeling when I think about it. It's been 3 years since I was up there, and I always hear some strange noises from the attic, coming from up in the rafters. There must be an animal living there. It's cold outside, so it was probably just trying to stay warm. At about 3 p.m., I decided to go have a look at the attic. I took a deep breath and slowly walked up the stairs. I walked up to the attic and I touched the door handle, pressing it down as I tried to open the door. It wouldn't open. I started to push it down, but it felt like something was blocking the door. How was that possible? How could something get in the way from the inside? I pulled again, pushing hard with all my might this time, and slowly, the door opened. I got inside and looked around with a flashlight, wanting to see what had been pressing against the door. It wasn't hard to figure out, but I stood there for a second, looking at the dresser with real puzzlement. How did that get in front of the door? It can't just have moved by itself. I felt my heart beat faster, my breath coming on quicker. Who did this? And how? Why? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move, and I shone the flashlight at the place. I couldn't see anything, though. I started to get this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I called out, asking if anyone was there. I heard a loud bang, and I turned around as fast as I could and just ran. I was falling halfway down the stairs, crying and running for my life. I heard something behind me, coming closer and closer. I ran out the door, running away from the house as fast as possible. I was about 8 feet away from the house, and then the worst possible thing happened. I tripped over something, and in that second, I knew that whatever was chasing me was going to catch me. I closed my eyes, seconds feeling like hours, but it felt like time had stopped, when all of a sudden, I passed out. When I opened my eyes again, I blinked fast and looked around. It was dark outside. What had happened? Why was I still alive? What was it that had chased me? I stood up slowly, checking for injuries. I was fine, apart from some bruises and a small cut on my leg. I was scared to go in the house alone, and I didn't have my phone. I decided to walk to the nearest neighbor. It was a little distant, but it wasn't long before I was standing on my neighbor's front porch. I knocked on the door, the lights illuminating the entrance, and I saw a man carefully open the door. He asked why I was knocking in the middle of the night. Didn't I know people were sleeping? I looked at him confused, asking what time it was. He looked at his watch, yawning as he said 2 a.m. I was so confused. How could I have been out for so long? I asked him if he could call my dad's number, and he gave me his phone. I dialed my dad's number and waited for him to answer, and right before it rang out, he picked up the phone, angrily asking who was calling in the middle of the night. I told my dad it was me, and I needed him to come pick me up from the neighbor's house. I thought I was attacked by someone inside Grandma's house. He was silent for a second, then he told me to stay where I was. It only seemed like a couple of minutes before he was pulling up. Soon as he arrived, I told him everything. He looked at me and said, "But it's Sunday. You're saying you were attacked on Friday, so what happened the last few days?" I started to cry. What had happened to me? My dad drove me to the hospital, and they examined me. They took some tests, and when they came back, they told me that they'd found drugs in my system. They said the drugs must have made me unconscious, and when they had a look at my body, they found signs that I'd been chained up, starved, and beaten. Meanwhile, the police went to the house, and they found a man. He'd been living in the attic for 2 years. He'd been watching me every day without me knowing it. He was scared and angry when I came up to the attic, so he decided to drug me and attack me. I don't know what else he did to me. He was arrested and sent to jail. To this day, I'm still in therapy. I don't live at that house anymore. I'm scared of everything now. I hope that one day I can trust people again. And, well, that's the end.